Today we're diving into something that's been eating away at me for years. Family Guy has been on the air for over 2 decades, and in that time, the show has left us with dozens of unanswered questions, abandoned plot lines, and mysteries that the writers either forgot about or deliberately left hanging. Some of these are dark, some are bizarre, and some genuinely change the way you understand the entire series. So buckle up, because we're going deep. We're talking about everything from the true identity of certain characters to plot holes that span multiple seasons, from disturbing implications the show glosses over to moments that suggest there's way more going on in Quahog than we realize. Let's start with something that seems simple on the surface, but gets weirder the more you think about it. The mystery of Bertram's complete disappearance. Remember Bertram? Peter's half-brother who was technically a fetus? He was Stewie's arch-nemesis for a while, appearing in multiple episodes as this genuinely threatening villain who wanted to kill Stewie and take over the world. Their rivalry was intense. We're talking time travel, alternate dimensions, serious death matches, and then he just vanishes completely. No explanation, no final episode, no conclusion to their conflict. The last time we see Bertram in any meaningful way, he's still out there, still presumably plotting against Stewie. And then the show just moves on like he never existed. Now, you might say the show just dropped the character because they got bored with the storyline, and that's probably true. But here's what makes it a genuine mystery. The show has brought back way more obscure characters for one-off jokes. They remember the weirdest callbacks. They brought back the Kool-Aid Man. They brought back Ernie the Giant Chicken for the millionth time. But Bertram, who was set up as Stewie's ultimate rival, who had multiple episode arcs, gone without a trace. Some fans theorize that Stewie actually did kill him off screen and just never mentioned it. There's a darker theory that Bertram succeeded in one of his plans in an alternate timeline, and that's why we never see him again. The show has played with multiple timelines and realities enough that this isn't totally crazy. But the real mystery is why the writers invested so much in this character and this rivalry, made it a legitimate ongoing plot thread, and then just abandoned it entirely. It's one thing to drop a one-off character. It's another to build up a multi-episode arc with serious stakes and then pretend it never happened. What actually happened to the real Jerome? Let's talk about Jerome, the black family that moved in after the Swansons left. And specifically, let's talk about the extremely weird circumstances of the real Jerome's return. In the episode where Jerome comes back, there's this whole plot about a different guy who was pretending to be Jerome. But if you actually pay attention to the timeline and what's said, things don't add up at all. The fake Jerome had been living in Quahog for a while, long enough to establish relationships with everyone, particularly Peter. When the real Jerome shows up, there's this brief confrontation, and then the fake one just leaves, and we never hear about him again. But here's the thing. Nobody ever questions how or why this impersonation happened. Who was the fake Jerome? What was his actual plan? How did he know enough about the real Jerome to pull this off? Why did he choose to impersonate this specific person and move to this specific neighborhood? And even weirder, the real Jerome just slots back into his life like nothing happened. But his wife and daughter had been living with the imposter. They never really addressed the psychological impact of this or investigate who this person really was. It's treated like a wacky mix-up and then completely forgotten. Some fans think this was actually a commentary on identity and race, that the show chickened out of fully exploring. Others think there was supposed to be a bigger storyline here that got cut. But the most disturbing theory is that the real Jerome might also not be who he says he is, and that's why everyone just accepts the situation and moves on. The whole thing is so bizarre and underexplained that it feels like there's a chunk of story missing. The chicken fights, is there actually a deeper meaning? Okay, stay with me on this one, because I know the Ernie the Giant Chicken fights are supposed to be just absurdist humor and extended fight sequences for the sake of it. But there are details in these fights that suggest something more is going on. First, let's recap. Peter and Ernie have these massive, destructive fights that span entire cities, cause millions in property damage, involve multiple vehicles and weapons, and somehow never result in any legal consequences for either of them. They've destroyed countless buildings, endangered thousands of people, and this just keeps happening across multiple seasons. But here's what's weird. In some episodes, other characters acknowledge the fights and the destruction. In others, it's like they never happened. The continuity is inconsistent in a way that's unusual even for Family Guy. Sometimes Peter has to explain to his family why he's injured from a chicken fight. Other times, he comes home completely destroyed, and nobody mentions it. There are fans who genuinely believe that the chicken fights aren't real, that there's some kind of psychotic break that Peter experiences, and that what we're watching is his internal mental state visualized. The evidence? The fights often start over completely absurd provocations. They escalate in ways that don't make physical sense. They incorporate elements that couldn't possibly be real, like surviving falls from planes or being hit by trains, and the aftermath is never dealt with realistically. In one episode, there's even a moment where Peter and the chicken are fighting, and Peter sees himself in a mirror. Some fans freeze frame this and swear that for a single frame, Peter sees the chicken's face in his own reflection. Now, this could be an animation error, but given how much effort goes into these elaborate fight sequences, it's suspicious. Another theory is that Ernie represents Peter's self-destructive impulses, and their ongoing battle is actually Peter's internal struggle with his own worst traits. The chicken is aggressive, unreasonable, holds on to grudges forever, and refuses to back down even when it's irrational. Sound like anyone we know? The real mystery is why these fights keep happening with no resolution, no character growth, and no permanent consequences. Even for a show that resets its continuity constantly, the chicken fights exist in their own weird bubble of reality. Where did Stewie's time machine actually go? Stewie built a functioning time machine. We've seen it. We've seen him use it multiple times across multiple episodes and even a direct-to-video movie. He has mastered time travel. This is canon. This happened. We all watched it. So where is it? Why doesn't he use it anymore? And more importantly, why doesn't he use it to solve literally any problem he or his family faces? The show occasionally references the time machine as still existing, but Stewie never uses it in any meaningful way after a certain point. There are episodes where having a time machine would instantly solve the plot. Episodes where characters die or terrible things happen that could be prevented with time travel. But Stewie just doesn't do anything about it. Now, the meta answer is obvious. The writers can't have a character with a time machine because it breaks all storytelling tension. But within the universe of the show, this makes no sense. Stewie is supposed to be a genius who's obsessed with control and winning. Why would he just abandon his greatest invention? Some fan theories suggest that Stewie did try to keep using the time machine, but caused something so catastrophic that he had to hide it away and vowed never to use it again. There's a theory that the reason the show's timeline is so inconsistent, why characters' ages and histories keep changing, why events are remembered differently or forgotten entirely, is because Stewie has actually been messing with the timeline constantly, and we're seeing the corrupted results. There's a darker theory that Stewie is still using the time machine regularly, but we only see the successful timelines. Every episode we watch is actually one of countless attempts where he's tried to manipulate events to his benefit, and we're seeing the version where things worked out. This would explain why deaths don't stick, why major events are forgotten, why character relationships reset. The most disturbing version of this theory suggests that the entire current version of the show is a timeline that Stewie created by accident, and he's been trying to fix it ever since. But he's trapped in this reality and can't get back to the original timeline. This would explain why the show's tone shifted so dramatically after a certain point, why characters seem slightly off from their earlier versions, and why Stewie himself seems less evil and more domesticated as time goes on. Brian's novel and the missing manuscript. Brian spent years working on his novel. It was a major part of his character, this pretentious, unpublished author who thought he was smarter than everyone else. We saw him talk about it, work on it, get rejected by publishers. It was a whole thing. Then there's an episode where his manuscript gets destroyed, and it's treated as this huge tragedy. We're supposed to feel bad for Brian losing years of work, except he's a dog who lives in a house with multiple people, including a super genius baby with advanced technology. The manuscript being destroyed should not be an unsolvable problem. But here's the real mystery. What was actually in that novel? We get tiny hints throughout the series, little snippets that Brian quotes or scenes he describes. And when you put them all together, they don't make sense as the same book. The genre seems to change. The plot points he mentions are contradictory. Even the title seems to be different in different episodes. Some fans have meticulously cataloged every reference to Brian's novel across the entire series, and the conclusion is that either Brian was writing multiple different books and calling them all the same project, or something extremely strange was going on with that manuscript. There's a theory that Brian's novel was actually good, potentially even brilliant, and that's why it had to be destroyed. The universe of Family Guy runs on certain rules, and one of those rules is that Brian has to be a pretentious failure. If he actually succeeded as a writer, it would break something fundamental about the show's dynamic, so the manuscript had to be destroyed to preserve the status quo. A darker interpretation is that the novel contained information that Brian subconsciously knew about the nature of their reality, things about the show itself that shouldn't be written down. In this theory, the destruction of the manuscript wasn't an accident, but a necessary correction by the universe to prevent a metatextual catastrophe. Or maybe the simplest explanation is the most disturbing. Brian never actually wrote anything substantial. The novel was always an excuse, a prop for his identity as an intellectual, and when it was destroyed, he couldn't reproduce it because there was nothing real to reproduce. He's been pretending for so long that even he believed in the fiction of his unpublished masterpiece. The death and resurrection of Brian, what really happened? Speaking of Brian, let's talk about the most controversial moment in Family Guy history, when they killed Brian off and replaced him with Vinny, only to bring Brian back a few episodes later via time travel. On the surface, this seems straightforward. The writers wanted to shake things up, kill off a main character, gauge audience reaction, and then decided to reverse it when the backlash was intense. But if you actually watch those episodes carefully, there are details that don't add up. First, the manner of Brian's death was unusually brutal for the show. Yes, Family Guy does dark humor, but the way Brian died, getting hit by a car and slowly dying while saying goodbye to the family, was played completely straight. There was no joke, no cutaway, no reset button. It was genuinely traumatic. Then Vinny shows up as a replacement, and here's where it gets weird. Vinny is a fully developed character who fits into the family dynamic immediately. He has a complete backstory, personality traits that complement and contrast with the family members, and even has a developed relationship with each character within one episode. This isn't how the show usually introduces characters. Most one-off additions are broad stereotypes or single joke characters. Vinny was clearly designed to be permanent. So what changed? The official story is that the fan backlash was so severe that the writers brought Brian back. But here's the thing, the time travel episode that brought Brian back would have taken weeks to animate. The decision to reverse Brian's death must have been made almost immediately, possibly even before the death episode aired, which means the whole thing might have been planned from the beginning as a publicity stunt. But that raises questions too. If it was planned, why make Brian's death so brutal? Why introduce Vinny as such a complete character if he was always going to be temporary? Why risk alienating the fan base if the reversal was always coming? Some fans believe that there were actually two versions of the post-death storyline developed simultaneously, one where Brian stayed dead and Vinny became permanent, and one where Brian came back. The studio might have been genuinely undecided and used audience reaction to choose which version to air. There's a weirder theory that the Brian who came back isn't the same Brian who died. Time travel in the show has been shown to create alternate timelines and parallel realities. The Stewie who went back and saved Brian is from a timeline where Brian died. The Brian he saved is from the original timeline. So the current timeline now has a Brian who never experienced his own death, but Stewie, who lived through a reality where his best friend died. This would explain some of the subtle shifts in their relationship after Brian's return. The darkest theory is that Brian was supposed to stay dead, that there were entire seasons planned out with Vinny as a main character, but something happened behind the scenes. Maybe a contract negotiation, maybe a creative conflict, maybe something with the voice actor Seth Green, who voices Brian and also happens to be one of the show's producers. The fact that Seth MacFarlane voices multiple main characters, including Brian, creates a weird power dynamic that we'll never fully understand from the outside. Quagmire's real past and the missing years. Quagmire is portrayed as a sex-obsessed pervert, and that's his whole character. But across the series, we get little glimpses of his backstory that suggests something much darker and more complex is going on. We know he was in the Navy. We know he's a pilot. We know he's traveled extensively. But there are huge gaps in his history that are never explained. There are references to things he's done, places he's been, people he's known that don't fit with the image of a simple airline pilot who lives in suburban Rhode Island. In various episodes, Quagmire demonstrates skills that don't make sense for his supposed background. He speaks multiple languages fluently. He has connections with international criminals. He's shown to have detailed knowledge of espionage techniques, weapons, and covert operations. In one episode, he's kidnapped by terrorists, and they seem to know him personally. There's a strong fan theory that Quagmire wasn't just in the Navy. He was in naval intelligence or worked as some kind of covert operative. His current life as a pilot and his sex addiction might be a cover for ongoing intelligence work, or it might be his way of coping with whatever he experienced during those missing years. The show occasionally hints at this with throwaway lines that Quagmire quickly deflects or changes the subject about. There are moments where he displays a level of competence and seriousness that completely contradicts his usual character. And there are episodes where he seems to be expecting danger or surveillance that never materializes, like he's always slightly paranoid. One particularly dark theory suggests that Quagmire's hypersexuality isn't just a character trait, but a psychological response to trauma. There are real psychological profiles of people who use sex addiction as a coping mechanism for PTSD, particularly combat-related PTSD. If Quagmire was involved in military operations that went wrong, operations where people died or where he had to do things he's not proud of, his current behavior could be his brain's way of processing that trauma. There's also the mystery of his house. Quagmire lives alone in a large house in a nice neighborhood. He's supposedly just an airline pilot. Where did the money come from? Airline pilots make decent money, but not enough to support his lifestyle. He's constantly traveling, constantly spending money on dates and gifts, has expensive items in his house, and never seems to worry about finances. Some fans think he's still on the government payroll, receiving payments for past services, or even still doing occasional jobs. Others think he inherited money, but from whom? We've met his parents, and they don't seem wealthy. There's a theory that Quagmire has money from illegal activities, possibly during his time in the service, and he's living off that while maintaining his pilot job as a cover. The Meg conspiracy. Is she actually a Griffin? This is one of the darkest and most persistent theories about the show, and it's built on a surprising amount of evidence. The theory is simple. Meg is not Peter and Lois's biological daughter, and at least some of the family knows it. Let's look at the evidence. First, Meg looks nothing like either of her parents or her siblings. Now, genetics can be weird, and recessive traits exist, but Meg's entire appearance is completely disconnected from the rest of the family. She has a different face shape, different hair, different body type, different everything. Second, the way the family treats Meg is unusual even for Family Guy's edgy humor. It's not just that they make fun of her, it's that they seem to genuinely dislike her existence. Peter doesn't just ignore Meg, he actively rejects her. Lois is occasionally sympathetic but mostly dismissive. Chris and Stewie join in on treating her badly. This goes beyond typical sibling rivalry or sitcom family dysfunction. Third, there are episodes that directly hint at Meg not being Peter's daughter. There's the episode where Peter takes a paternity test for Meg, and the results are ambiguous. There's another episode where Meg discovers she was conceived at a party where Lois was with multiple men. There are countless jokes about Meg being adopted or not really part of the family. But here's where it gets really dark. What if the family's treatment of Meg isn't just bad writing or pushing edgy humor too far? What if it's actually a psychological defense mechanism? If Meg is the product of an affair, or if she was adopted under complicated circumstances, the family's cruelty toward her might be their way of dealing with the cognitive dissonance of having her in their lives. Lois would feel guilty about the affair or whatever situation led to Meg's existence, and that guilt manifests as emotional distance. Peter would feel betrayed and cuckolded, but he agreed to raise Meg anyway, and his resentment comes out as cruelty. Chris and Stewie pick up on the parents' treatment and mirror it. There's an even darker version of this theory that suggests Meg knows or suspects the truth, and that's why she's so desperate for her family's approval. She's trying to earn her place in a family that sees her as an outsider. Her constant humiliation isn't just bad luck, it's the universe reflecting her fundamental status as someone who doesn't belong. Some fans have pointed out that Meg is the only family member who never really gets a win. Peter has episodes where he succeeds or is shown to be competent. Lois has her music and her occasional moments of power. Chris has his artistic talent. Stewie is a genius. Even Brian, for all his failures, is shown to have genuine talents and successes sometimes. But Meg is consistently, relentlessly punished by the narrative itself. What if the show is actually a very dark psychological portrait of a family that made a decision to raise a child under complicated circumstances and has never recovered from that decision? What if every cruel joke at Meg's expense is actually showing us a genuine ongoing tragedy? The other Griffins. Why does no one talk about them? In various episodes, we're introduced to other members of the Griffin family. Peter has siblings. His parents have histories. There's a whole extended family out there, but they barely ever appear. And when they do, their existence raises more questions than it answers. Peter's biological father is Mickey McFinnigan, an Irish immigrant and drunk. His adoptive father is Francis Griffin, a strict Catholic who abused Peter. We've met Peter's sister Karen, his black half-brother from his biological father, and various other relatives. But these people almost never come up, even in situations where family would naturally be involved. Where are these relatives during major events? Where are they during weddings, funerals, crises? Why doesn't Peter ever call his siblings? Why don't his kids have relationships with their extended family? The Pewterschmidt family is involved in Peter and Lois's life fairly regularly, so it's not like the show avoids extended family entirely. It's specifically the Griffin side that seems to vanish. There's a theory that Peter has deliberately cut himself off from his family and created the Griffins of Quahog as his own self-contained unit, precisely because his extended family is so dysfunctional. His father was abusive, his biological father was an absent drunk, his relationships with his siblings are complicated. By moving to Quahog and building his life around Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland, Peter created a chosen family to replace the biological one he escaped from. But that raises the question of why these relatives occasionally appear. If Peter has cut them off, why do they show up at random times? And why does nobody in his current life ever ask about his family? Lois must have wondered why Peter's relatives aren't around. The kids must have asked about grandparents and aunts and uncles. A darker interpretation is that Peter's family history is even worse than what we've been shown, and the occasional appearances of relatives are the show hinting at deeper traumas that will never be fully explored. Peter's father abused him, we know that. But what exactly happened in that house? What did Peter experience growing up that made him the broken, childish, often cruel person he is now? There's a fan theory that Peter suffered severe abuse as a child, possibly even worse than what's been implied, and his current personality is the result of arrested development. He never properly matured because he never had a childhood. His selfishness, his inability to think long term, his need for constant stimulation and approval, all of this could be explained by childhood trauma that stunted his emotional growth. If this is true, then the absence of Peter's family isn't just a plot convenience. It's a deliberate choice by Peter to protect himself and his children from the cycle of abuse. The occasional appearances of his relatives are either obligations he can't avoid or moments where his defenses break down. What's actually wrong with Stewie? Let's talk about the elephant in the room regarding Stewie's character. Early in the series, Stewie was portrayed as genuinely evil, a baby genius who wanted to kill his mother and take over the world. He built weapons, he had plans, he was a legitimate threat. Then over time, the show softened his character. He became more interested in his teddy bear, his relationship with Brian, his sexuality. The murder plans faded away. The official explanation is that the writers found Stewie worked better as a complex character than as a one-note villain. But within the universe of the show, what happened? Did Stewie just stop wanting to kill Lois? Did he grow out of it? Why would a super genius baby have such a dramatic personality shift? One theory is that Stewie never actually wanted to kill Lois. His early behavior was a manifestation of standard infant rage and frustration. But because he's a genius who can build technology, those feelings express themselves in building death rays instead of crying. As he matured emotionally, even while remaining physically a baby, his understanding of the world became more sophisticated, and his anger at his mother resolved naturally. But there's a much darker possibility. What if Stewie did kill Lois successfully? And what we're watching now is a timeline where he brought her back or prevented her death using time travel, and he's been different ever since because he experienced the reality of matricide. Think about it. We know Stewie has a time machine. We know he's used it. We know the show has dabbled with alternate timelines and realities. What if there's a timeline where Stewie actually went through with killing Lois, and it traumatized him so badly that he used the time machine to undo it, and ever since then, he's been a different person? This would explain his sudden personality shift, his increased attachment to his family, and his move away from world domination, plans toward more personal concerns. He's a baby who successfully killed his mother, experienced whatever that reality was like, and now has to live with the knowledge of what he's capable of, while also pretending it never happened. There's another theory about Stewie that's even more disturbing. What if Stewie isn't actually a genius? What if he's a severely disabled child, and everything we see from his perspective, all the inventions and schemes and adventures, are his internal fantasy life? The other characters can't understand him because he has a developmental disability. His inventions are just toys. His plans are just a child's imagination. In this interpretation, the show is actually showing us the tragic reality of a family with a disabled child, filtered through that child's imagination, where he's powerful and important instead of vulnerable and dependent. When we see Stewie with Brian, we're seeing a child playing with the family dog. When we see Stewie building a time machine, we're seeing a child playing with blocks. The gap between Stewie's perception and reality is the real story. Now, this theory is probably too dark for what Family Guy actually is, but it's notable that the show has never definitively explained how much of what Stewie does is real within the universe of the show. Different episodes seem to have different rules about whether his inventions work, whether other characters can understand him, whether his adventures actually happen. Cleveland's return and the Brown House. When Cleveland left to star in his own show, The Cleveland Show, it was treated as a natural life change. He was moving away, starting a new chapter. Then, when that show was canceled, he came back to Family Guy, and it was like he'd never left. But if you actually pay attention to the timeline and what's said, it doesn't make sense. Cleveland was gone for several years in real time, and the show implied it was also several years within the universe. But when he comes back, nothing has changed. His house is available. He's immediately reintegrated into the friend group. Everyone picks up exactly where they left off. But here's the weird part. What happened to the house during that time? Cleveland owned that house. It was his property. When he moved away, did he sell it, rent it out, leave it empty? And if he did sell it or rent it, how did he get it back so easily when he returned? Some fans have meticulously tracked the timeline and noticed that there are episodes during Cleveland's absence where his house is visible in the background, and sometimes there are lights on or cars in the driveway. Someone was living there, but who? And why is this never addressed? There's a conspiracy theory that Cleveland never actually left, that the Cleveland show was something happening in an alternate reality or a parallel timeline, and the Cleveland that came back isn't quite the same Cleveland that left. Small differences in his personality, changes in his relationships with the other characters, all could be explained if this is actually a different version of Cleveland from another timeline. Another theory is that Cleveland's entire spin-off experience was a dream or fantasy. He never actually moved, never actually left Quahog, and the Cleveland show was his imagination, or a coma dream or something similar. When he came back, he was actually just waking up from whatever mental state had produced the fantasy of his other life. The darkest version of this theory suggests that Cleveland died, and the Cleveland who came back is the universe course-correcting, replacing him with a version so similar that nobody notices the difference. In the Family Guy universe, where death rarely sticks and reality is flexible, this isn't as crazy as it sounds. The Mystery of Adam West. The late, great Adam West played a fictionalized version of himself as the mayor of Quahog, and the character was a perfect blend of absurdist humor and genuine weirdness. But there are things about Mayor West's character that never got explained, and are actually pretty disturbing when you think about them. Mayor West is clearly mentally ill. He has delusions, paranoia, possibly hallucinations. He believes in conspiracy theories, has imaginary conversations, and frequently demonstrates that he's not living in the same reality as everyone else. And yet, he's the mayor. He holds a position of significant power. How? The show treats this as a joke, but within the universe, it's a genuine mystery. How does someone who is clearly unfit for office keep getting elected? Why doesn't anyone remove him? Where is the city council? Where are the checks and balances? One theory is that Mayor West is actually incredibly wealthy, and his money keeps him in power despite his obvious mental issues. Quahog is presented as a small town with a lot of corruption, so maybe West's money and connections make him untouchable. Another theory is darker. Mayor West is exactly as competent and mentally present as any other politician, but we see him through the distorted lens of Family Guy's reality. What looks like insanity to us is actually just standard political corruption and incompetence amplified for comedic effect. But the most interesting theory about Adam West involves time travel and reality manipulation. Bear with me. Mayor West occasionally demonstrates knowledge of things he shouldn't know, makes references to events that haven't happened yet, and seems to exist slightly outside normal causality. There are moments where he seems to be aware that he's in a TV show. What if Mayor West is actually a time traveler, or someone who exists across multiple timelines simultaneously? What if his apparent insanity is actually him perceiving multiple realities at once and getting them confused? This would explain why he's sometimes incredibly wise and sometimes completely delusional, why he has resources and knowledge that don't make sense for a small-town mayor, and why reality seems to bend around him in weird ways. After Adam West died in real life, the show did a tribute episode where Mayor West's character also passed away. It was touching and respectful, but it also raised questions about what happens to Quahog now. Who's running the city? They mentioned a new mayor, but never really showed them. Is Quahog just continuing to function without actual government? In a show where character deaths rarely matter, why did they choose to make Adam West's death permanent and meaningful? The continuity question. Are we watching multiple timelines? This is the big one, the overarching mystery that might explain everything else. Family Guy has notoriously inconsistent continuity. Characters die and come back. Major events are forgotten. Relationships reset. The same stories get told with different details. Usually this is dismissed as just the nature of animated sitcoms, but what if it's actually all intentional? What if Family Guy isn't showing us one continuous timeline, but rather multiple timelines, alternate realities, and parallel universes all edited together? What if every episode is from a slightly different version of Quahog, and the inconsistencies aren't mistakes but clues? This would explain so much. It would explain why characters don't age but years clearly pass. It would explain how characters can die and come back. It would explain why major character developments get reset. It would explain the chicken fights, Brian's death and resurrection, Stewie's time machine, all of it. The show has directly engaged with timeline shenanigans multiple times. There are episodes about alternate realities, time travel, and multiverse theory. The road to episodes with Stewie and Brian often involve reality-bending scenarios. There's even an episode where the universe literally resets, and they have to choose which version of reality to live in. What if all of that wasn't just random sci-fi plotting? What if the show has been telling us all along that we're watching a multiverse, and every episode is a glimpse into one of infinite possible quahogs? This theory is supported by the cutaway gags. Think about those for a second. Characters will reference something, and then we'll see a flashback or cutaway to an event that definitely never happened in any previous episode. The standard explanation is that these are just jokes, non-canonical gags for comedic effect. But what if they're actually memories from other timelines? When Peter has a cutaway to himself as a different person in a different time period or a different situation, what if that's actually a version of Peter from an alternate reality, and the cutaway is a momentary bleed-through from that timeline into the one we're watching? This would mean that the characters themselves might be subconsciously aware of their other selves in other timelines. That's why they have memories of events that never happened in their timeline. That's why they sometimes reference things that contradict established continuity. That's why the show can be so casually inconsistent without it breaking the universe. If this is true, then every mystery in the show can be explained by timeline divergence. Bertram disappeared because in this timeline he was never a major character, even though in other timelines he was Stewie's arch nemesis for years. The chicken fights happen outside normal reality because they're occurring in a liminal space between timelines. Brian's death and resurrection was literally a timeline split and merge. Cleveland's return was a timeline convergence. And if we're watching multiple timelines, then questions about character consistency, plot holes, and abandoned storylines aren't actually problems, they're features. The show isn't badly written or inconsistent. It's actually showing us the complexity of a multiverse where every possible version of these characters exists simultaneously. The conspiracy at Pawtucket Brewery. Peter has worked at Pawtucket Brewery for most of the series, and while the show occasionally does episodes about his job, we rarely get a clear picture of what actually happens there or what the company is really about. But if you pay attention to the details across multiple episodes, there are hints that something very strange is going on at that brewery. First, the brewery itself seems to change. Sometimes it's a small local operation, sometimes it's a massive corporation with international reach. Sometimes Peter is a low-level employee. Sometimes he seems to have significant responsibility and access. The building's layout changes between episodes. The number of employees seems to fluctuate wildly. Then there's the product itself. Pawtucket Patriot Ale is clearly a parody of Budweiser, but there are episodes that suggest the beer has weird properties. People who drink it have exaggerated reactions. There are jokes about what's actually in the beer. And there's the whole episode about the brewery stealing the recipe from another company, suggesting corporate espionage and illegal activity. Some fans have noticed that Peter never seems to face real consequences for his behavior at work. He's been drunk on the job, caused massive damage, publicly embarrassed the company, and yet he's never fired. He's been promoted, demoted, transferred, but never actually loses his job permanently. Why? One theory is that Pawtucket Brewery is actually a front for something else. Money laundering, weapons development, illegal drug manufacturing, something that requires a legitimate business as a cover. Peter is kept employed because he's too stupid to notice what's really going on, making him the perfect cover employee. Another theory is that the brewery is conducting experiments on its employees. Think about how many weird things have happened to Peter that might be explained by chemical exposure. His intelligence fluctuates wildly. He's survived things that should kill him. He's had bizarre medical conditions. What if the brewery has been testing chemicals on its workers without their knowledge? There's a darker theory that Peter is actually essential to the brewery in ways that aren't clear, possibly related to his genetics or biology. Maybe his body processes alcohol in a unique way that makes him valuable for product testing. Maybe he's part of a long-term study. Maybe there's something about the Griffin bloodline that the company needs for their research. The most disturbing piece of evidence is that in episodes where Peter loses his job at the brewery, bad things happen to him and his family, and the universe seems to course correct to get him back there. It's like reality itself needs Peter to work at Pawtucket Brewery. Why? What purpose does he serve that's so important the fabric of the show's universe ensures he stays employed there? The missing Meg episodes. Here's something genuinely strange that fans have documented. There are multiple episodes where Meg is simply absent with no explanation. Not episodes where she's written out of the plot, but episodes where she literally doesn't appear at all, not even in background shots of the family home. In a normal sitcom, you might occasionally have an episode where a main character is visiting relatives or away at camp or something, and the show explains their absence. Family Guy doesn't do this with Meg. She's just gone sometimes, and nobody mentions it. The family sits down for dinner and there are 4 chairs instead of 5. Peter talks about the kids and only references Chris and Stewie. Some fans have created spreadsheets tracking Meg's appearances and absences, and there's no pattern to when she disappears. It's not related to the voice actor's availability because other characters voiced by the same actors appear normally in those episodes. It's not related to the plot because her absence never affects the story. So where does Meg go? Within the universe of the show, does she just cease to exist periodically? Does the family forget she exists? Or is this evidence of the timeline theory, where some timelines have Meg and others don't, and we're seeing episodes from both? There's a really dark theory about this. What if Meg runs away regularly because of how her family treats her, and they literally don't notice she's gone? She could be missing for days or weeks, and they just don't care enough to mention it. When she comes back, they accept her presence as casually as they accepted her absence. This would make every Meg-centric episode even more tragic. She's not trying to earn her family's love despite occasional meanness. She's trying to earn acknowledgement of her very existence from people who sometimes forget she's alive. The real reason behind James Woods' vendetta. Actor James Woods has appeared as himself multiple times in Family Guy, always as an antagonist to Peter. The show established this rivalry through various episodes where Woods and Peter are in conflict, with Woods portrayed as vindictive, petty, and obsessed with destroying Peter. But if you actually track the timeline of their conflict, Peter's initial offense against Woods is relatively minor. Peter stole his identity for a while, which is definitely wrong, but Woods' response is wildly disproportionate. He goes after Peter's family, tries to destroy his life, and maintains this grudge across multiple episodes and years. Why is Woods so obsessed with Peter specifically? Peter is nobody. He's not rich, not powerful, not famous. He's a random guy from Rhode Island who briefly inconvenienced Woods. Yet Woods treats Peter like his arch nemesis, investing enormous time, money, and energy into revenge. The fan theory here is that Peter represents something to Woods, or that there's a history between them that hasn't been revealed. Maybe Peter's identity theft wasn't the beginning of their conflict, but just the latest incident in a long rivalry. Maybe there's a connection between the Griffin family and Woods that goes back generations. A wilder theory suggests that James Woods is actually from the same multiverse-aware group that includes characters like Mayor Adam West and possibly Stewie. Woods knows something about the nature of the Family Guy reality, and his vendetta against Peter is actually an attempt to break or fix something in the universe itself. Peter is a nexus point, a character around whom reality bends, and Woods is trying to remove him for reasons related to maintaining or altering the timeline. There's also the metatextual element. The real James Woods has had a complicated relationship with Family Guy and its creator Seth MacFarlane, with periods of collaboration and periods of public feuding. Some fans think the in-show conflict between Woods and Peter is actually Seth working out his real-life conflicts with the actor through the show. If that's true, then the vendetta isn't about the characters at all. It's about real-world drama bleeding into the fictional universe. What happened in Korea? There are multiple references throughout the series to someone having been in Korea. It's never entirely clear who went to Korea or when or why, but the references suggest something significant happened there. Sometimes it seems like Peter was in Korea. Sometimes it seems like one of his friends was. The details are always vague. This might seem like just sloppy continuity, but the Korea references are too frequent to be random. There's something about Korea that matters to the show's backstory, but it's deliberately kept mysterious. One theory is that Peter's father or another member of his extended family fought in the Korean War, and there's family trauma from that experience that affects Peter even though he doesn't directly remember it. Generational trauma from war is a real thing, and it could explain some of Peter's dysfunction. Another theory focuses on Quagmire. Given his military background and the hints about his covert operations past, it's possible that Quagmire was involved in something in Korea, possibly during the Korean War if we assume he's older than he appears, or possibly in more recent operations. North Korea would be a prime location for intelligence work, and Quagmire has the right skill set. There's a darker possibility that several of the main characters were involved in some kind of incident in Korea together, and they've all made an unspoken pact never to discuss it. This would explain why the references are vague and why nobody ever demands clarification when Korea is mentioned. They all know what happened, and they all know they don't talk about it. The most disturbing version of this theory suggests that whatever happened in Korea is the reason these specific people ended up living on the same street in Quahog. Maybe they were all involved in the same military unit or intelligence operation. Maybe they witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Maybe they did something that required them to be relocated and given new identities. Quahog could be a safe house or a witness protection location for people who were involved in this Korea incident. This would explain why the characters' backstories are often vague or contradictory. They're not real backstories, they're cover stories. It would explain why this group of wildly different people with different backgrounds all ended up in the same small neighborhood. It would explain why, despite all the insane things that happen in Quahog, outside authorities rarely get involved. The absence of mental health care. Multiple characters in Family Guy clearly need serious mental health intervention. Peter has shown signs of intellectual disability, impulse control disorders, and possible brain damage. Stewie displays murderous ideation and builds weapons as a baby. Meg shows signs of depression and suicidal ideation. Quagmire is a sex addict. Brian is an alcoholic with narcissistic personality disorder. Lois has had breakdowns and violent episodes, and yet none of them are ever in consistent treatment. Mental health care is occasionally referenced as a joke, but none of these characters are getting the help they obviously need. Why? In the real world, the answer is obvious. It's a comedy show, and long-term psychiatric treatment isn't funny. But within the universe of the show, what's going on? Why isn't Child Protective Services involved with the Griffin family? Why hasn't Quagmire been arrested or mandated to treatment? Why isn't anyone helping these people? One theory is that Quahog exists in a kind of regulatory dead zone where normal social services don't reach. Maybe because of the corruption, maybe because of the town's isolation, maybe because of something more sinister. The characters can't get help because help isn't available. A darker theory is that they're all in treatment already, and what we're watching is actually their shared delusion or group therapy visualization. The entire show is taking place in a psychiatric facility, and each episode is the patients working through their traumas and issues through this elaborate fantasy. Peter's childishness is regression, Stewie's violence is externalized anger, Meg's abuse is internalized self-hatred, all filtered through this cartoon reality they've collectively created. The darkest version of this theory suggests that they're not in treatment, they're in an experiment. Quahog is a controlled environment where mentally ill people are observed to see what happens when they're left to their own devices without intervention. Every horrible thing that happens is being documented by researchers who never intervene because that would contaminate the data. The truth about evil Stewie. In the episode The Big Bang Theory, we meet an evil version of Stewie from an alternate timeline. This evil Stewie is what our Stewie could have become if he'd continued down his original path of violence and world domination. But there are details about this evil Stewie that suggest something more complicated is going on. Evil Stewie seems to know things about the timeline that he shouldn't know. He's not just an alternate version who diverged at one point. He seems to have knowledge of multiple timelines and multiple versions of himself. He talks about the nature of time and reality in ways that suggest he's been studying it across dimensions. What if evil Stewie isn't actually an alternate version? What if he's our Stewie from the future after something goes terribly wrong? Time travel in Family Guy doesn't follow consistent rules, so it's possible that evil Stewie is what our Stewie becomes, and he's traveled back to try to ensure his own existence by preventing our Stewie from changing. There's a theory that our Stewie is actually trying to prevent himself from becoming evil Stewie, and that's the real reason he abandoned his plans for world domination. He's seen what he could become, and he's actively working to avoid that future. Every sweet moment with Brian, every time he shows compassion, every time he helps his family, that's Stewie fighting his own nature to avoid the evil timeline. But what if it's already too late? What if certain events have already been set in motion that will inevitably lead to Stewie becoming the evil version? This would make the show a tragedy, where we're watching a character we love slowly transform into a monster, and every happy moment is bittersweet because we know what's coming. The really disturbing implication is that if evil Stewie exists, he came from somewhere. That means there's a timeline where Lois is dead, where the family is destroyed, where Stewie successfully conquered the world and made it a nightmare. And if timelines can bleed into each other, if the multiverse is real in this show, then that terrible reality is still out there, still existing, still affecting our timeline in subtle ways. The Goldman Conspiracy. Mort Goldman is the local pharmacist, and on the surface, he's just a stereotype of a neurotic Jewish man. But if you pay attention to Mort across multiple episodes, there are suggestions that he knows a lot more than he should about various characters and situations. Mort has access to everyone's medical records. He knows what prescriptions they're taking, what conditions they have, what drugs they're buying. In a small town like Quahog, this means Mort potentially knows everyone's secrets, who's taking fertility drugs, who's on antidepressants, who's getting medications for STDs, who's buying suspicious combinations of over-the-counter drugs that might indicate illegal drug manufacturing. And Mort never seems to use this information maliciously, but he also never seems surprised by anything. When the most outrageous things happen in Quahog, Mort just accepts them and continues with his day. Why? One theory is that Mort is actually the most intelligent person in Quahog, possibly smarter than even Stewie, and he's been quietly manipulating events behind the scenes for years. His pharmacy is perfectly positioned to influence the population through medications. He could be conducting his own experiments, affecting people's behavior, all while maintaining his harmless persona. There's a darker possibility that Mort is reporting to someone, maybe a government agency, maybe a pharmaceutical company, maybe something more sinister. Quahog's population is being monitored through their medications, and Mort is the data collection point. This would explain why such a small town has so many bizarre incidents, and why those incidents never result in outside intervention. They're being documented for research purposes. The most disturbing theory about Mort relates to his son Neil, who has occasionally shown signs of being much more capable and dangerous than his nerdy exterior suggests. What if the Goldman family isn't what they appear to be? What if they're intelligence operatives or corporate spies who have embedded themselves in Quahog for monitoring purposes, and their entire identities are covers? The greased-up deaf guy enigma. The greased-up deaf guy is one of Family Guy's most absurdist recurring characters. He's exactly what he sounds like, a deaf man who covers himself in grease and runs around naked, evading capture while yelling, "You're never gonna catch me." But like many things in Family Guy, there are layers here that don't make sense. First, how is he deaf but also verbal? He speaks clearly and understands when people are chasing him. The show is inconsistent about whether he can actually hear or whether deaf is just part of his catchphrase. Second, where does he come from? He appears randomly, causes chaos, and vanishes. Does he live in Quahog? If so, where? Does anyone know his real name? How does he support himself? Where does he get the grease? Third, why can no one catch him? He's slippery, yes, but he's also just a regular guy. The entire Quahog police force, plus various citizens, plus people with weapons and vehicles, have all failed to catch one naked, greased man. That's not just improbable, it's physically impossible unless something else is going on. The fan theory is that the greased-up deaf guy isn't human. He's something else, something that exists outside normal reality. He might be a manifestation of chaos itself, a creature that feeds on disorder and confusion. His appearances might correlate with moments when reality in Quahog is particularly unstable. Another theory suggests he's a ghost or spirit, doomed to run forever, and what we're seeing is a supernatural entity that the characters misinterpret as just a weird guy. This would explain why he can't be caught, why he disappears without a trace, and why he never ages or changes despite appearing across many years. There's also a metatextual reading where the greased-up deaf guy represents pure comedy, the id of the show itself. He has no purpose beyond chaos and laughter. He can't be caught because you can't catch a joke. His existence is absurd because absurdity is the point. In this interpretation, he's the most honest character in the show because he's not pretending to be part of a coherent narrative. The real Lois Pewterschmidt. Lois is supposedly from a wealthy family, the Pewterschmidts, who are essentially parodies of the Kennedys. But Lois's backstory has always been weirdly inconsistent. We've seen her as a wild child, a music prodigy, a model, a martial artist, and various other things that don't quite fit together. The standard explanation is that Lois had a rebellious youth and tried many things before settling down with Peter. But if you actually map out her timeline, it doesn't work. She would have had to accomplish more in her teenage and early adult years than is physically possible. She has skills and experiences that require decades of training, all supposedly gained before she got married in her early 20s. One theory is that Lois is actually much older than she appears, possibly due to some kind of life extension technology or procedure that her wealthy family had access to. This would give her the time needed to accumulate all her skills and experiences. Another theory is darker. Lois isn't who she says she is. The real Lois Pewterschmidt might have died or disappeared, and the woman we know is someone else who took her identity. This would explain the inconsistent backstory. She's cobbled together a false history from multiple sources and occasionally contradicts herself because she can't keep her lies straight. There's evidence for this in how the Pewterschmidt family treats Lois. They're dismissive of her, disappointed in her choices, and seem to view her as a failure or embarrassment. But if she's from this wealthy, powerful family and she married someone like Peter, shouldn't they have intervened? Shouldn't they have tried to break them up, paid Peter off, something? The fact that they're just vaguely disappointed and don't actively interfere suggests they might not actually care about Lois as much as they should if she were really their daughter. What if Lois was adopted or is the product of an affair, and the Pewterschmidts keep her around but don't consider her a real member of the family? This would explain her desperate need to prove herself, her rebellious past, and her eventual choice to marry someone completely inappropriate as a final rejection of the family that rejected her. The darkest version of this theory suggests that Lois is actually a Pewterschmidt from a branch of the family that was involved in something illegal or immoral, and she's been cut off and erased from the official family history. The Pewterschmidts we meet are allowing her to use the name, but pretending she doesn't really count as one of them. The Disney connection that no one talks about. Family Guy exists in a universe where Disney characters, Star Wars characters, and various other intellectual properties are somehow real. The show has done multiple crossover episodes, particularly with The Simpsons and American Dad, establishing a shared universe. But the implications of this are never fully explored. If Disney princesses exist in the Family Guy universe, what does that mean? Are they real people who look like cartoon characters? Are there parallel dimensions where they exist? Or does the Family Guy universe operate on Roger Rabbit rules where cartoons and humans coexist? The show has had episodes where characters meet and interact with fictional characters as if they're real, but it's never consistent. Sometimes it's clearly a parody or fantasy sequence. Other times it seems to be treated as literally happening. The Star Wars episodes were initially presented as just the characters acting out the movies, but later references suggest that they actually lived those events. This creates a massive ontological problem for the Family Guy universe. What's real? What's fiction? Are the characters aware that they're in a show, or are they experiencing something different? When Peter watches TV and sees other Fox shows, is he watching documentaries about real people in his world? Or is he watching fiction like we are? There's a theory that Family Guy takes place in a universe where consciousness creates reality, and fictional characters become real because people believe in them strongly enough. This would explain the Disney crossovers, the Star Wars episodes, the constant references to movies and TV shows that seem to be simultaneously fiction and reality. A darker interpretation is that the Family Guy universe is collapsing under its own contradictions, and these increasingly impossible crossovers are signs that reality itself is breaking down. The multiverse is merging, dimensions are bleeding together, and eventually the whole thing will collapse into incoherence. Or maybe the simplest explanation is the most disturbing. Nothing in Family Guy is real. The entire show is a simulation, a fictional universe that exists on multiple layers of unreality, and the characters are vaguely aware of this, but can't escape it. They're trapped in a world where nothing makes sense because nothing has to make sense, where they exist purely for the entertainment of viewers. They can sometimes almost perceive, but never quite reach. The unopened door in the Griffin house. This is a really specific mystery that observant fans have noticed. There's a door in the Griffin house that has never been opened or explained. It's visible in some shots of the upstairs hallway, positioned in a way that doesn't correspond to any room we've ever seen. The layout of the Griffin house has always been somewhat fluid. Rooms appear and disappear. The house seems bigger on the inside than the outside. The attic is sometimes there and sometimes not. But this one specific door has been consistently visible in the background of multiple episodes across many seasons, and it's never been opened or referenced. So what's behind it? The boring answer is that it's just an animation error or oversight, a background detail that doesn't mean anything. But Family Guy has shown that they pay attention to long-running background elements and sometimes turn them into plot points years later. Fan theories about the unopened door range from practical to insane. Maybe it's a storage closet full of Peter's embarrassing secrets. Maybe it's a room that Meg lives in, explaining why she's sometimes absent. Maybe it's where they keep the original version of Brian before he was replaced. Maybe it leads to another dimension. Maybe it's been sealed for a reason, and opening it would release something terrible. The most popular theory is that the door leads to a room where someone or something is being kept prisoner. Maybe a family member that the Griffins want to forget about. Maybe one of Peter's relatives. Maybe a previous version of one of the children. Maybe something that Stewie created and couldn't destroy. There's a really dark theory that the door is actually an exit from the simulation, a way out of the Family Guy universe into something else, and the characters instinctively avoid it because opening it would mean confronting the nature of their reality. The scariest possibility is that the door has been opened. We've just never seen it happen on screen. Someone in the Griffin family has been going in and out of that room regularly, and whatever they're doing in there is something they hide from everyone else, including the audience. The question of Herbert's past. Herbert is the creepy old neighbor who's sexually attracted to Chris. The character is controversial for obvious reasons, walking a line between dark comedy and material that would be completely unacceptable in any other context. But beyond the surface level creepiness, there are real mysteries about Herbert's character. He's presented as a World War II veteran, and we've seen glimpses of his past that show he was a pilot. But there are episodes that suggest he's much older than World War II, with references to earlier time periods and wars. How old is Herbert actually? There are also inconsistencies in his physical capabilities. Usually he's presented as elderly and feeble, barely able to move, with a weak voice. But occasionally he displays surprising strength, speed, and agility, particularly when chasing Chris. Is he faking his infirmity? Or is something else giving him temporary bursts of capability? One theory is that Herbert is literally being kept alive by his obsession with Chris. He's held on far longer than his body should allow because he has this fixation that won't let him die. His deterioration and moments of strength directly correlate with his level of fixation. Another theory, darker and more seriously implied by the show itself, is that Herbert has been preying on young people for decades, possibly centuries, and has somehow found a way to extend his life. Maybe he's made a deal with something supernatural. Maybe he's discovered a medical treatment. Maybe he's something inhuman wearing a human appearance. The show occasionally hints that Herbert has connections to dark forces or hidden knowledge. He has resources and abilities that don't make sense for a simple retiree. Where does his money come from? How does he avoid legal consequences? Who protects him? There's one particularly disturbing theory that Herbert is actually dead and has been for years, but his obsession was so strong that it keeps his body animated. He's essentially a zombie, held together by pure predatory desire, and the reason nobody stops him is because at some level, they can sense he's not entirely human anymore, and they're instinctively afraid. The hemoglobin mystery. In one episode, Stewie needs a blood transfusion, and they discover his blood type is extremely rare. This becomes a plot point for that episode, but it's never explained why Stewie's blood is so unusual. Genetic mutations can cause rare blood types, but usually there's a family history or medical explanation. If Stewie has a rare blood type that no one else in his family has, that raises questions about his parentage. Is Peter really his father? Is Lois really his mother? Could Stewie be genetically engineered or the product of some kind of medical experiment? We know Stewie is a super genius with abilities far beyond any normal human. His intelligence alone suggests something unusual about his genetics or neurology. Combined with the rare blood type, this suggests that Stewie might not be entirely human, or that he's been genetically modified in some way. There's a theory that Lois and Peter underwent fertility treatments to conceive Stewie, and those treatments involved experimental genetic modification. This would explain his unusual intelligence, his rare blood type, and possibly his homosexual orientation if genetic factors were manipulated. A darker theory suggests that Stewie isn't Lois and Peter's biological child at all. He might be a genetic experiment that was implanted in Lois, or he might have been swapped at birth with their real child. His parents might not even be aware that he's not genetically theirs. The darkest version of this theory ties back to the Pewterschmidt family. What if Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father, was involved in some kind of genetic research or human experimentation, and Stewie was the result? This would explain Carter's occasional interest in Stewie, his financial support of the family, and why he tolerates Peter despite despising him. Peter and Lois are unwitting custodians of a genetic experiment, and Carter needs to keep them funded and stable to continue monitoring Stewie's development. The absence of consequences. This is perhaps the biggest mystery of all. Why does nothing matter in Family Guy? Characters commit crimes constantly: murder, assault, arson, theft, terrorism, you name it, and there are never lasting consequences. Even when characters are arrested, they're quickly released. Even when someone dies, they come back. You could say this is just the nature of episodic comedy, but Family Guy has also shown that it can do continuity when it wants to. There are running gags that span hundreds of episodes. There are character developments that stick. There are relationships that evolve. So the show is capable of consequences. It just chooses not to apply them to the most serious actions. Why? One theory is that Quahog exists in a bubble of reality where normal laws don't apply. Maybe it's a government experiment, a pocket dimension, a simulation, something that explains why actions don't have appropriate reactions. The people of Quahog are being allowed to do whatever they want because they're test subjects, or because they're not real, or because they're in some kind of purgatory. Another theory focuses on Peter specifically. What if Peter is actually in a coma, or has been dead for years, and everything we're watching is his dying brain creating increasingly absurd scenarios because it can't accept that it's ending. The reason nothing has consequences is because it's all happening in a dying mind where cause and effect are breaking down. There's a theory that Family Guy takes place in the bad place from the good place, a specially designed hell for these specific characters where they're forced to endure endless cycles of violence, humiliation, and dysfunction without ever being able to grow, change, or escape. Quahog is hell, and they're all trapped there, vaguely aware that something is wrong, but unable to identify what or fix it. The most disturbing theory is that consequences do exist, but we're only seeing the timelines where things worked out. For every episode we watch where Peter survives some insane stunt, there are infinite other timelines where he died, and we're being shown the curated version where everyone keeps surviving against all odds, because that's the only version of events where the show can continue. Think about it. If Family Guy is a multiverse, and if we're jumping between timelines, then we might always be watching the lucky timeline, where despite all logic and probability, things work out just enough for the show to continue. All the other timelines where characters died permanently, where actions had appropriate consequences, where the story ended, those still exist. We just don't see them because the show has to go on. This means that the Family Guy we watch is literally the most improbable version of events, the 1 in a trillion chance where everything keeps working out. And that's actually horrifying because it means all the realistic consequences are happening somewhere. We're just being shielded from them. The secret identity of the evil monkey. For years, there was an evil monkey living in Chris's closet that only Chris could see. This was treated as a running gag, with the monkey appearing periodically to point menacingly at Chris. Then eventually, the show revealed that the monkey wasn't actually evil. He was just misunderstood, and they gave him a sad backstory about losing his family. But that explanation raises more questions than it answers. If the monkey wasn't evil, why was he living in Chris's closet? Why was he pointing at Chris menacingly? What was he trying to communicate? And why could only Chris see him initially, before other characters eventually acknowledged his existence? There's a theory that the evil monkey was actually a warning. He was trying to tell Chris something, pointing at him in an attempt to communicate danger or important information. Maybe he was trying to warn Chris about something in the house or something about the family. The menacing gesture might have been desperation, not malice. Another theory suggests that the evil monkey is from another dimension or timeline, and he's been trying to get Chris's attention because Chris is somehow important to multiple realities. Maybe Chris has abilities or a destiny that hasn't been revealed yet, and the monkey was trying to prepare him or warn him. The show's explanation about the monkey losing his family and squatting in Chris's closet is almost certainly not the full truth. How did he get there? How did he survive? Why that specific closet? Why Chris? None of it really makes sense even within the show's internal logic. There's a darker possibility that the monkey represents something about Chris's psychology. Maybe Chris has repressed memories or trauma that his mind externalized as the evil monkey. The pointing gesture could be Chris's subconscious trying to get his conscious mind to remember or acknowledge something important. The fact that other people eventually started seeing the monkey could mean that Chris's delusion became shared, or it could mean that whatever psychological issue the monkey represented started affecting the whole family. In this interpretation, the monkey getting a backstory and becoming sympathetic is actually Chris beginning to process and integrate his trauma in a healthier way. The mystery of Consuela. Consuela is the Griffin family's maid, known for her limited English and her catchphrases about needing more lemon pledge. She appears occasionally and is treated as a minor recurring character. But there are things about Consuela that don't add up. First, her level of English comprehension changes dramatically between appearances. Sometimes she genuinely doesn't understand what people are saying. Other times, she clearly understands but pretends not to. This suggests that her language barrier might be partially or entirely an act. Second, she has resources and connections that don't make sense for someone in her supposed economic position. She has family members who appear in various episodes with their own businesses and properties. She's able to travel. She has access to information and goods that would require money or connections. Third, there are implications that Consuela knows a lot more about the Griffin family than she should, and that she's possibly been reporting information to someone. Her position as a maid gives her access to the entire house, to private moments, to information that could be valuable. One theory is that Consuela is actually a very intelligent and capable person who uses her maid persona as a cover for gathering intelligence. She could be working for immigration authorities, for a private investigator, for a foreign government, for anyone who needs information about the Griffin family or their connections. Another theory is that Consuela represents an entire network of domestic workers who are vastly more organized and powerful than anyone realizes. She's not just a maid, she's part of a coordinated group that has infiltrated homes across Quahog and is collectively gathering information or working towards some goal. There's also the possibility that Consuela is connected to the Pewterschmidt family somehow. She works for the Griffins, but maybe she was actually sent by Carter to keep an eye on Lois and the kids. Her presence in the house isn't random, it's strategic surveillance. The darkest theory about Consuela is that she's actually the most powerful character in the show, playing a long game that none of the other characters understand. While everyone else is wrapped up in their petty dramas, Consuela has been quietly working towards some goal that will eventually be revealed, and her apparent simplicity was all a disguise. Why can't anyone leave Quahog? Characters occasionally leave Quahog for vacations or trips, but any attempt to permanently relocate always fails. The show brought Cleveland back after his spinoff ended. Characters who try to move away for new jobs or new lives always end up returning. Even Meg, who has every reason to leave and never come back, stays in Quahog. At first glance, this seems like just a necessary TV convention. The show is set in Quahog, so characters can't permanently leave, or there's no show. But within the universe, why does every attempt to leave fail? Why does the universe conspire to keep everyone trapped in this town? One theory is that Quahog is built on some kind of cursed or supernatural location. Maybe it's on a Hellmouth type situation where dark forces keep people trapped. Maybe there's something in the water or the air that creates a psychological dependency. Maybe the town itself is sentient and won't let people leave. Another theory goes back to the government experiment idea. If Quahog is a controlled study, the subjects can't be allowed to leave because that would contaminate the data. Whenever someone tries to escape, outside forces intervene to bring them back under the guise of natural circumstances. There's a psychological angle too. Maybe the reason no one can leave Quahog is because they're all deeply dysfunctional people who are unconsciously afraid of change. They sabotage their own attempts to leave because as terrible as Quahog is, it's familiar. It's their comfort zone, even if that zone is toxic and destructive. The darkest version of this theory is that they're already dead. Quahog is purgatory or hell, and the characters are trapped there eternally, doomed to repeat their dysfunctional patterns forever. They can take trips, they can have adventures, but they can never truly escape because this is their afterlife, their punishment, or their process of redemption that never quite completes. The reason Peter never ages but the world moves forward. Peter has been the same age for over 20 years of episodes, but within the show's universe, time definitely passes. Technology advances, current events are referenced, years go by, but the characters don't age appropriately. This is standard for long-running animated shows, but Family Guy occasionally breaks its own rules by acknowledging that time is passing, which makes the lack of aging more noticeable. There are episodes where characters explicitly state how many years have passed. There are episodes that take place years in the future or past. There are episodes where characters do age, and then it's reset by the next episode. The show is aware of its own temporal inconsistency and occasionally lampshades it, but never explains it. What if the reason time passes but the characters don't age is because they're unstuck in time, experiencing the same period of their lives over and over with slight variations? Every episode is a different iteration of roughly the same time period, and the advancing technology and cultural references are bleed through from other timelines? Or what if the characters are aging, but they're trapped in a loop where they're constantly returned to their current ages? Some force is resetting them, keeping them in this specific configuration for reasons unknown. They might have lived thousands of years by now, aging and being reset over and over, with only vague memories of previous cycles. There's a medical angle too. What if exposure to something in Quahog has halted everyone's aging? The brewery, the nuclear plant, something in the water supply, maybe even something supernatural. The residents are all being preserved at their current ages, which is why nobody questions it within the universe. They can't perceive that they're not aging, because the same thing affecting their bodies is affecting their perception. The most existentially terrifying version of this theory is that the characters are aware they're not aging and that time doesn't work properly, but they can't talk about it. There's some kind of compulsion or mental block that prevents them from directly acknowledging the temporal anomaly they're living in. Occasionally, someone will make a joke about not aging or reference the passage of time in contradictory ways, and that's them trying to break through the block, trying to communicate the horror of their situation through the only means available. The significance of the chicken in every episode. Not the giant chicken that Peter fights, but the literal chickens that appear in the background of numerous episodes. Fans have documented that there are chickens visible in random shots throughout the series, sometimes in places where chickens have no logical reason to be. A chicken in a crowd scene in the city, a chicken in the background of an office, chickens in places chickens shouldn't be. This could be just Easter eggs, animators having fun with background details. But what if it's intentional? What if the chickens are monitoring devices, agents of some kind, all connected to Ernie the Giant Chicken's larger agenda? Think about it. Ernie has been Peter's nemesis for years. Their fights cause massive destruction. But what's Ernie's actual goal? Why does he keep coming back? What does he want? The show has never really explained his motivation beyond that expired coupon from years ago. What if Ernie is part of a larger chicken conspiracy? What if chickens are slowly infiltrating Quahog and human society in general, and Ernie's fights with Peter are a distraction from the real invasion? Every time Peter and Ernie destroy half the city, everyone's focused on them, and they don't notice the other chickens moving into position. This theory sounds completely insane, but Family Guy has done elaborate long-form jokes before. The chicken fights themselves started as a one-off gag and became a series-spanning running joke with increasingly elaborate fight sequences. Why couldn't the background chickens be building towards something similar? There's a darker reading where the chickens represent surveillance or monitoring. Someone or something is keeping track of Quahog through these chicken observers, and Ernie's periodic appearance is him checking in, gathering information through his fights with Peter that take him all over the city and reveal weak points, power structures, and the capabilities of the residents. Joe's disability and his impossible physical feats. Joe Swanson is paralyzed from the waist down after an accident in the line of duty as a police officer. He uses a wheelchair and has dealt with the realistic difficulties of his disability in various episodes. But he's also occasionally shown doing things that should be physically impossible for someone with his specific injury. He's played sports, gotten into physical altercations, and performed feats of strength that don't make sense with his medical condition. Sometimes this is played for laughs, with the joke being that everyone's surprised he can do something. But other times, it's presented as normal, and then the next episode he's back to being significantly limited by his disability. The inconsistency could just be sloppy writing, but what if there's something more going on? What if Joe's paralysis isn't entirely physical? What if it's psychological, trauma-based, or even supernaturally imposed? There's a theory that Joe was involved in something during his police work that resulted in a curse or supernatural punishment. His paralysis isn't from the accident, it's from something else. And occasionally, when he's flooded with adrenaline or determination, he can temporarily overcome it. This would explain why his abilities fluctuate so dramatically. Another theory suggests that Joe has access to experimental treatment or technology that he doesn't talk about. Maybe through his police connections, maybe through the military, maybe through Bonnie's family. He can walk and function normally sometimes because he's being treated with something that temporarily restores his mobility. But he hides this from everyone for reasons related to insurance fraud, disability benefits, or maintaining a cover story for covert work he's still doing. The darkest theory about Joe is that he's not actually disabled at all and never was. The wheelchair is a deep cover identity for some kind of ongoing investigation or protection program. He's pretending to be disabled to hide his true capabilities while he monitors Quahog for some law enforcement or intelligence agency. His accident was a cover story for why he suddenly needed to assume this identity. This would explain why he's sometimes capable of things that should be impossible, why his police work often involves him being more competent and mobile than his condition should allow, and why nobody ever questions the inconsistencies in his physical capabilities. Everyone around him is in on it, or they're conditioned to not notice, or asking questions about Joe's disability has been socially programmed as taboo, so nobody investigates too closely. The real reason behind the censorship Family Guy is known for pushing boundaries, but there are occasional moments where the show censors itself. Usually this is for network standards, but sometimes the censorship is part of the joke, with the show bleeping something or cutting away specifically to make the audience imagine something worse than what was actually said or done. But there are instances of censorship that seem strange. Moments where something is bleeped or obscured, and the context suggests it wasn't actually that offensive, or where the pattern of what gets censored versus what doesn't makes no sense. What if some of the censorship isn't about network standards at all? What if the show is censoring information that would reveal something about the true nature of Quahog or the characters? Information that can't be shared because it would break the fourth wall or expose the reality of their situation. There's a theory that the characters sometimes try to communicate with the audience directly, breaking character to explain that they're trapped or that something is wrong. And those moments get censored before we can hear them. The bleeps and cuts aren't protecting us from offensive content, they're protecting the show's reality from being exposed. In this interpretation, Family Guy is actually a documentary about real people trapped in some kind of artificial reality, and the censorship is the system suppressing their attempts to ask for help. When a character's mouth is blurred or their words are bleeped, they're not saying something dirty, they're saying something true. This would recontextualize every censored moment in the show's history. Go back and watch them with the assumption that what's being hidden isn't a curse word or sexual reference, but a plea for escape or a revelation about their true situation. It turns the show from a comedy into a horror story where we've been laughing at people trying desperately to tell us they need help. The mystery of Trisha Takanawa. Trisha Takanawa is the local news reporter who appears regularly to report on whatever insane event is happening in the episode. She's professional, competent, and notably is one of the few characters who seems to exist outside the main cast dysfunction. She reports on their chaos but doesn't participate in it. But here's what's weird. Trisha has been reporting on Quahog events for years, and she never seems disturbed by any of it. She reports on dimensional rifts, time travel murders, supernatural events, and absolutely insane situations with the same professional detachment she uses for a school bake sale. Nothing phases her. Nothing surprises her. She just reports and moves on. Why? What has Trisha seen that makes the constant insanity of Quahog seem normal to her? Or is she not actually human? Is Trisha Takanawa an android, an alien, a dimensional observer? Is she documenting Quahog for some external audience? There's a theory that Trisha is the only real person in Quahog, and everyone else is part of a simulation or reality show that she's documenting. She's the outside observer, the control, the normal human perspective against which all the insanity is measured. Her lack of reaction to events isn't professionalism. It's the detachment of someone who knows none of it is real. Another theory suggests that Trisha has seen so much genuine horror in her journalism career that nothing in Quahog phases her anymore. Maybe she covered wars, natural disasters, genuine atrocities. After experiencing real trauma, the surreal chaos of Quahog is almost a relief because at least it's absurd rather than meaningfully evil. The darkest theory is that Trisha is trapped just like everyone else, but she's aware of it in a way the other characters aren't. She reports on events with detachment because she's dissociating, her mind protecting itself from the horror of her situation by treating everything as just another story to report. Her professionalism isn't competence, it's a coping mechanism. Death himself and his relationship with the Griffins. The show has personified Death as an actual character, and he's appeared in multiple episodes. Usually he's shown as doing his job, collecting souls, but he's also interacted with the Griffin family in personal ways. Peter has met Death. Death has dated Peter's mother. Death is an established entity in this universe. So why does Death allow people to come back to life? Why doesn't he enforce the rules of mortality? We've seen characters die and return with no explanation. We've seen Death himself be inconsistent about who stays dead and who doesn't. One theory is that Death in the Family Guy universe is just one of many deaths, each responsible for different timelines or realities. When someone dies in one timeline, they might still be alive in another, and the show is showing us different timelines where different rules apply. Our Death can only manage his specific timeline, and the multiverse is beyond his jurisdiction. Another theory is that Death has lost control. Something has happened in Quahog, or in the larger universe, that has weakened his power or made the boundaries between life and death permeable. He's still doing his job, but the job has become impossible, and he's trying to maintain order in a reality where the fundamental rules are breaking down. There's a romantic interpretation where Death has a soft spot for the Griffin family, particularly after dating Peter's mother. He's become personally invested in them and occasionally bends the rules in their favor, allowing them to escape deaths they should have succumbed to or bringing them back when they do die. The darkest theory is that Death's appearance in the show is evidence that the characters are actually already dead. They're in an afterlife where Death is no longer their enemy, but their guide or custodian. The reason people can die and come back, the reason nothing makes sense, is because they're all existing in a post-death state where the normal rules of reality no longer apply. The multiverse convergence theory. Let's tie a lot of these mysteries together with one overarching theory. Family Guy is showing us a multiverse in the process of converging. All the inconsistencies, all the contradictions, all the impossible returns and forgotten plot lines, they're not mistakes. They're evidence that multiple timelines are colliding. Stewie's time machine destabilized something. His repeated use of time travel, his creation of alternate timelines, his interactions with other versions of himself, all of it damaged the integrity of reality. Now, multiple versions of Quahog from different timelines are bleeding into each other, overlapping, creating a composite reality where anything can happen because we're actually seeing events from multiple different universes spliced together. This explains everything. It explains why characters have inconsistent memories and backstories because they're remembering events from different timelines. It explains why deaths don't stick because we're shifting to timelines where that person didn't die. It explains the chicken fights existing outside normal reality because they're happening in the spaces between timelines. It explains why locations and character details change, why people appear and disappear, why nothing has permanent consequences. The characters occasionally seem aware that something is wrong with their reality. They make jokes about continuity errors. They reference things that didn't happen. They acknowledge deaths that were undone. These aren't just meta jokes for the audience. They're the characters themselves perceiving the multiverse convergence, feeling the instability of their reality without being able to fully understand or articulate it. And it's getting worse. If you track the show chronologically, the inconsistencies and reality breaks become more frequent and more severe as the series progresses. In early seasons, the show had relatively stable continuity with occasional resets. In later seasons, anything can happen and nothing is reliable. This isn't just the writers caring less about continuity, it's showing us that the convergence is accelerating. The really terrifying implication is, what happens when the convergence completes? When all the timelines finally merge completely, either reality will stabilize into one coherent timeline, which means all but one version of each character will cease to exist, or reality will collapse entirely under its own contradictions, destroying Quahog and everyone in it. Stewie knows this. He has to know this. He's the one with the time machine, the one who understands temporal mechanics, the one who's been to multiple timelines. His shift from evil genius bent on world domination to a more domestic, personal character isn't just character development, it's guilt. He knows what he's done to reality, and he's given up his ambitions because he's trying to fix the damage before it's too late. Every time Stewie uses time travel now, he's not just changing events, he's trying to reinforce the stability of the timeline. He's fighting a losing battle against entropy and chaos that he himself created. And he can't tell anyone because admitting what he's done would require explaining that their entire reality is compromised, which would probably drive them insane. Brian knows some of this too. His close relationship with Stewie means he's been exposed to the temporal instability more than anyone else in the family. This explains his increasing alcoholism and depression. He's aware, at least subconsciously, that something is fundamentally wrong with their world, and he's drinking to cope with existential horror he can't fully articulate. The show itself is becoming more surreal, more willing to break its own rules, more openly absurdist as it goes on. This isn't just the writers running out of ideas. It's an accurate representation of what's happening within the universe. The rules are breaking down because reality is breaking down. So what's really going on? After examining all these mysteries, we're left with more questions than answers. But certain patterns emerge. Quahog is not a normal place. The Griffin family is not a normal family. Time doesn't work correctly. Death doesn't work correctly. Reality itself seems compromised. Whether it's a government experiment, a supernatural curse, a technological singularity, a collapsed timeline, or something else entirely, Quahog exists in a state of exception to normal reality. The people who live there are trapped in some kind of loop or cage or experiment, living out variations of their dysfunctional lives while outside observers watch and document. The real question is, are they aware? Do Peter, Lois, Chris, Meg, and Stewie know that something is wrong with their world? Or are they trapped in ignorance, living their lives while reality crumbles around them? There's evidence for both. Most of the time, the characters seem oblivious, accepting each new absurdity as just another day in Quahog. But occasionally, in quiet moments, there are hints of awareness. A character will make a comment that seems to acknowledge the artificiality of their situation. Someone will express confusion about the passage of time or question why things never really change. These moments are brief and usually played for laughs, but they suggest that underneath the comedy, there's a genuine tragedy. The characters are trapped. Whether they know it or not, they're prisoners of some kind, doomed to repeat their patterns forever. Peter will always be childish and destructive. Lois will always be torn between her cultured past and her chaotic present. Chris will always be dumb but sweet. Meg will always be the family scapegoat. Stewie will always be the genius baby with dark secrets. Brian will always be the pretentious underachiever. They can't grow, they can't change, they can't escape. They're like insects in amber, preserved in their dysfunction for the entertainment or study of forces they don't understand and can't resist. And the scariest part? We're complicit. We watch their suffering, we laugh at their pain. We come back episode after episode to see what fresh hell they'll endure. If Quahog is a prison, then we're the guards. If it's an experiment, we're the researchers. If it's a show, we're the audience that keeps it running. The final mystery, what happens when it ends? Every show eventually ends. Family Guy has been on for over 2 decades, but it won't last forever. When the show finally concludes, what happens to these characters? Do they just cease to exist? Do they get trapped in their final episode forever, living out those last moments in an eternal loop? Or do they somehow become free, released from whatever force has been keeping them in Quahog? There's a theory among hardcore fans that the show has already ended multiple times, and we just don't remember. Maybe there have been series finales that aired, conclusive endings to the story, But then reality reset, and we're all back to watching new episodes with no memory of the end we already witnessed. This would explain the show's unlikely longevity. Every time it gets canceled or reaches a natural ending point, something happens that resets everything and allows it to continue. The network changes its mind, the ratings suddenly improve, some external force intervenes. It's not luck or good timing. It's the universe refusing to let the show end because ending would require resolving all these mysteries, and something doesn't want them resolved. What if the show itself is sentient? What if Family Guy has become a living thing that exists beyond the control of its creators, and it's fighting for its own survival by any means necessary? The characters are trapped in the show, the creators are trapped by the show, and we're all trapped as viewers, unable to stop watching because the show won't let us. Or maybe the ending has already been revealed, hidden in plain sight among all the other episodes. Maybe there's one specific episode that shows us the true nature of Quahog, the real fate of the characters, the answer to all the mysteries, but we've dismissed it as just another wacky story and never realized we were watching the key to everything. Closing thoughts. So where does this leave us? We've explored dozens of mysteries, from the mundane to the cosmic, from abandoned plot lines to existential questions about the nature of reality itself. We've seen evidence of government conspiracies, supernatural forces, time travel paradoxes, and multidimensional chaos. The truth is, we may never get answers to most of these questions. Family Guy is not a show that cares about providing closure or resolution. It's a show that thrives on chaos, on inconsistency, on refusing to play by the rules. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe the lack of answers is the answer. We're all looking for meaning in the chaos, searching for hidden patterns and secret truths in a show that might be nothing more than random absurdity. Or maybe we're onto something. Maybe buried beneath all the cutaway gags and shock humor and pop culture references, there really is a deeper story being told. A story about people trapped in cycles they can't break, living in a reality that doesn't make sense, searching for meaning in a meaningless world. Maybe that's what all these mysteries are really about. Not government conspiracies or time travel or supernatural forces, but the fundamental human experience of trying to find order in chaos, trying to make sense of a world that often makes no sense at all. Or maybe I've been watching too much Family Guy and overthinking a cartoon about a fat guy and his talking dog. But here's what I know for sure. These mysteries exist. These questions are unanswered. And whether they're intentional puzzle pieces or just continuity errors, they've given us something to think about, something to theorize about, something to explore together. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes a show memorable. Not the answers, but the questions. Not the resolution, but the mystery. Not the destination, but the journey of trying to figure out what the hell is actually going on in Quahog, Rhode Island. So the next time you watch Family Guy, pay attention. Look for the patterns. Notice the contradictions. Question the reality you're being shown. Because somewhere in those episodes, hidden among the jokes and the violence and the absurdity, there might be answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. Or maybe it's just a show about a talking baby with a British accent who wants to kill his mom. Sometimes a cartoon is just a cartoon. But what if it's not? What if everything we've discussed is real within the universe of the show? What if Peter really is trapped in a multiverse convergence? What if Stewie really is fighting to prevent reality collapse? What if Meg really isn't a griffin? What if Quahog really is a prison or experiment or supernatural trap? What if, somewhere in an alternate dimension or parallel timeline, there's a version of these characters who figured it all out, who discovered the truth about their reality, who found a way to escape? And what if they're trying to warn us? Thanks for watching, everyone. Or reading, I guess, since this is a script. If you made it this far, you're either really into Family Guy mysteries or you have way too much free time. Either way, I appreciate you. Let me know in the comments what mysteries you think I missed, what theories you disagree with, and what questions you want answered. And remember, in Quahog, nothing is what it seems. Everything is connected, and the truth is always stranger than fiction. Until next time, This has been 4 hours of your life you'll never get back. You're welcome.